Hi, I'm Pamela Walker, and I'll be your host for this edition of Barrier Free TV. I'll be interviewing Cheryl Marie Wade, who is a poet, a writer, a performer, and she has been gaining a lot of recognition in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she's ready now to take on the nation. So we'll be looking at a video of hers in a little bit, but first let's meet Cheryl and talk a little bit about her work and her video. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Pamela.
First, what would you like to tell us about, well, how you got started in writing, in performing, how long you've been doing it, things along those lines?
Well, I've been writing pretty much all my life. I'm 43 years old, so I went through school back in the days when they made you learn how to write, so I'm sort of grateful for that. And as I became disabled when I was 10, the encouragement for any kind of arts career kind of went down the tubes. And so my writing for many years was just in journals and diaries, things like that. And it wasn't really, I went on and I did the usual thing. I went and got an education because the Department of Rehab supported an education. It was in psychology research, of all things. And finally, what happened is, in my consideration, my good fortune was that my disability got worse, and I was not able to continue with that as a career. And what it made me do was draw back and think about what were my real dreams and my real talents. And always I had been a good writer, and I'd always been told I was a good writer, but it was always encouraged to do something like teach or, you know, use it in some academic field. And so I really didn't start, I started writing at that point because I was ill, you know, just sorting out my thoughts. And about the same time, this was 1985, some disabled women here in the Bay Area started a readers theater called Rye Cripps, Disabled Women's Readers Theater. And one of my good friends was one of the women who started it, and she invited me to join. And it was there really that I first started to write about disability, and I started writing poetry, which I had never really written. I had always written essays and journals and stories, but I had never written poetry. And we performed for the first time in March of 1986, and I got hooked. I just loved it. And since then, I worked with Rye Cripps for about 4 years, and I went on and I began, I was one of the original members of a performance dance troupe called Axis, and in the last year I've been focusing more on my solo work. But I've been writing a lot, and I've been published quite a bit in journals, and the performance work is really what I love. I love to take the poetry and put it, learning what I did in readers theater, which is how to begin to structure a story with poems. And I kind of added my own style to that and threw away the script. Finally, last October, I gave up my net and started performing without scripts and really performing to the audience rather than just reading, doing readings.
Now, as a writer, you've experienced a lot of success. You'll be in Ms. Magazine,
That's
and
right.
as a performer, you're gaining recognition, and now you're taking on video.
That's right. Yeah, I've received a lot of encouragement from my friends, including you particularly, to start trying putting my work on video. In the last year, I have had an increase in pain and instability of my disability, which has meant that just as my performing career was really beginning to take off, I began to have doubts that I could perform solo. And so having video open up to me as a way to get my work out there so that people really see the energy and the power of my performance work, which adds a lot to my poetry. And so we did video from a live performance of the Festival 2000 celebration of cultural diversity that San Francisco did last year. And you got some film on that, and
we'll be looking at that in a little bit.
And we edited that, and that was my first effort. And so what I've decided to do, since I'm this body electric that I inhabit is not exactly a touring kind of gal, I've decided to look at video as my way of touring. So I've started to think very seriously about designing work specifically for video, And so my next video project, which will be an expansion of the video you see here, will actually be specifically designed for the video audience and will be done live, but it will be designed with that in mind. And then I will try to get it on cable and other, it'll be done for broadcast quality, and I will also continue to do direct marketing, which I feel is the way for disabled producers to go, because let's face it, the great mother mainstream media has not exactly opened her arms to us and is not exactly welcoming stories that are truthful and complex about disability, which is what the real story is complexity and a lot of just a lot of things that the media, the mainstream media, doesn't cover at all. And when it comes to disability, I think we have a great option with video because it's an inexpensive medium compared to film, and we can directly market our works to disabled people, to independent living centers, to disabled student centers, to women's centers.
And it's something, as you were saying, that as a disabled person, it is a way of reaching people when you have pain or disability issues that interfere with your being able to do live performances.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned mainstream media doesn't really accept disability messages. What is different in the types of messages that you are putting out and what mainstream media is putting out?
Well, mainstream media in general, and by that I mean primarily television, although I'm sure it's the case for radio and film as well, have very limited views of people in general. But when it comes to disabled people, we are set into two categories. We are either telethon, what I call the doom-dipped eyes of the poster child, this pathetic, please, dying,
the pitiful characters.
Dying tomorrow kind of view of disability, fate worse than death, so on. Or we're these superheroes that can climb the Statue of Liberty or something. I mean, and the reality is for most of us, we live lives very much in between those extremes. Some of us do have elements of life that are sad, that are a difficult struggle. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of anger involved with the loss, which we sometimes don't want to even deal with ourselves. There's a real loss to disability. But it's not the ultimate tragedy. The tragedy is the limitations imposed on us by a society that doesn't want to deal with the kinds of differences that we bring. And so my work is really about not apologizing for being disabled. It's really about the complexity, about the struggle, and the celebration of our differences. I do a lot of work about looking at these differences as something like a work of art, instead of like, yes, I'm different, but like me anyway.
Now, is your work primarily focused on a disabled audience or a non-disabled audience?
I really focus it, I mean, first of all, of course, I want to provide work that is exciting and speaks to disabled people, because we have not had work that tells the truth about our lives. We just haven't. There's been very little out there. There's very little that you look at, that I look at as a disabled woman and find relevant to my life, including my disability. Now I'm finding more and more works that are interesting from a woman's perspective, but still that's an able-bodied woman's story. And I bring another dimension to being a middle-aged woman, and that's that I'm a disabled middle-aged woman. And so that's really what my story's about. And the work that I do, I think I've had tremendous response from non-disabled people, because they are excited by the power in the work. And I hear people say, wow, I just never thought of it that way. And it's like, it's just, when you hear work that's exciting or you see work that's exciting, it I think moves people in a different way, because my work is about being powerful, it's about being sexy, it's about being sad, it's about being angry. And it's about all the emotions that, as human beings, we all deal with, living in a world that's a hard world to live in.
Disabled or non-disabled?
Non-disabled, too, right. Yeah. And I think my work speaks to women, particularly, although I certainly have many men say that I really love this. I love what you're saying. And, people, I think the people who like my work the most are not the haves of the world. They're the people who are feeling like there are a lot of voices and a lot of points of view out there that we're not hearing and we're not seeing.
Now, certainly your work would be considered thought-provoking. Some people would also.
I would hope so.
Some people would also consider some of it controversial. I imagine that for many people it's validating and affirming. For others, it's angry. It's considered angry. Could you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I always talk about the fact that anger to me is a very vital part of the story of any minority group member. Their struggle to have a good life, to feel good about themselves when every image you see, and this is not just for the disabled people in the world, but for particularly Americans, and I'm just going to deal with this as an American product, because that's what I am. The images that we see are so limited as to tell us who we are that it's very hard to feel good about yourself. Even like for disabled people, we've had this magnificent piece of legislation called the Americans with Disabilities Act passed a year ago. And at the same time that they passed this wonderful civil rights legislation that really gives us a status as a minority group with rights, they slash every program that helps us survive and be in the world. Now that's like you get 1 minute of empowerment and the rest of the year is slaughter and demoralization, and you're back fighting to stay out of an institution. So I feel like what I'm doing, and I always think of my first audience is disabled people, is Crips, okay? Is those people who don't see themselves anywhere and don't have messages that say, if you can't, if you can't do it this way, try it another way. If you don't like what you see or you don't like what you hear, put out another message. And that's what my work is about, because I started to say no to the lies about myself through my poetry. And to me, the first important word in any of our struggle is no. And hopefully by the time we work from that no point, no, I am not this, no, I am not that lie, no, I am not this powerless nothing that you say I am, sooner or later we get to a point where we can say, yes, this is who I am. And when you get to that point where you at least have moments in your day that you can say that, you can start to really move away from that negative identity and start to really genuinely feel like a whole person.
So you're talking about the anger that is the seed of self-respect.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
The seed of self-respect.
I think that disabled people have been so denied their righteous anger. I mean, every human being feels anger in the world, but somehow disabled people aren't allowed that. We are told, you're not being good, that's not going to help you. Well, no, it is going to help me. It's not going to help the rehab person or whatever, but it's going to help me.
Good. Thank you, Cheryl. You're doing important work, and we're looking forward to seeing more of your videos,
Great.
More of your performances, more of your writing.
I hope so.
Thanks. This is Pamela Walker, and thanks for joining us for Barrier-Free Television. And we'll be looking now at Cheryl's video of her new work called Here.